You want to bring us in?
Yeah. All right. Welcome, everybody. This is going to be another episode of our Ability Podcast. And today we're going to touch on the topic that Dino and I know a lot about, and that's ADHD. So once again, I'm Chris McCarthy.
This is Dino Schulatz.
And we are these non-experts that actually I would say we're probably experts in our own way of what ADHD is to us. And I thought it would be a really good idea to just kind of put it out there. And, you know, if there's a lot of people that are not sure if they are experiencing the same issues, and I'd love to talk about stories like growing up and what we deal with now being over 40 in a society that actually recognizes that ADHD is a thing. And is it considered a disability? I personally... I don't know. That's why ability is, because is it a disability? No, I think it's an ability.
I want to focus on the positive attributes of it, and I think there's a lot out there that focuses on how the negative attributes of ADHD compared to a neurotypical person or living in a neurotypical society that's been built around the majority, and how you can't do the same things that they can, but that hyper focus on the negatives, takes away from the attributes that I think ADHD, the society and ADHD, the people that are ADHD, basically have a unique role in a population. You know what I mean? In an entire population of they have an important role in it, and you don't want all the same brain types across all of humanity. That would be disastrous. So
absolutely, and I think we'll dive into some of the history that you know about, because the history is super important to me and it interests me. And I don't know a lot about that. So that's going to be fun to talk about. I think maybe just to start off with, at what point in your life do you think this diagnosis of ADHD probably should have come into play, considering some of the things that you experienced, like growing up and going through school?
Yeah. The first time I was diagnosed with ADHD was I was 18 and I went to college, and that's a key point for me because I stopped playing sports. And so my life prior to that was, maybe 6 different sports leading up to high school: football, basketball, and track during high school, narrowed down to just basketball, focused on basketball in my senior year of high school. But I had a father that played college and semi-pro football, and so he was very, my sports were year-round and all the time. And that physical exhaustion and that physical activity kind of kept the negative attributes of ADHD at bay. I would say, looking back further than that, even in grade school, I went to the bathroom in every single class, not because I had to go to the bathroom, but about halfway through that hour period, I needed to, walk around, and, the teachers knew I wasn't doing anything, nefarious. But what I think is important is that I needed to move my body, and sitting still for an hour a day was not something I could do. So they let me walk around for 5 minutes, and then I'd come back and I'd be a better student. I'd be less distracting. So the symptoms were always there, but understanding what they were and that I was different is where the power, I think, comes in. And I didn't realize that until, almost a couple of years ago, where I finally admitted it to myself. And now I'm on a journey to build a life aligned with it, and focus on my abilities and not my less than,
Absolutely. And that's what's so important in this world, is really focusing on the abilities that you have. And those with ADHD, I believe it's a superpower in its own way. I believe I was probably in 6th grade. I had moved to a new school in Wisconsin, and the first friend that I made would have to go to the little window every day and collect his pills for Ritalin.
Okay.
And I was like, why do you take that? You're taking drugs, man. And it never occurred to me that how helpful it probably was for him, because I never had the opportunity to go to a doctor and talk about that. And now that I look back, I probably had all of the same issues with concentration and being all over the place and disrupting the class, because I was already ahead of where the teacher was, even at a young age.
Yeah.
whatever they were talking about, I was like, oh, cool. I either already know about this or I saw it on TV, and I'm out. I'm checked out. You know,
Well, were you a question? Or were you a visual person? Because I sometimes didn't grasp things if they were just said to me auditorily, like through the ear. But if I saw how it worked on a board, I immediately understood it. And so I was just curious if you felt that you were the same, or do you just visual is easier than auditory in terms of learning, or do you notice a difference?
I notice a difference when it comes to visual stuff. You get an imprint of the picture, and one of the abilities that I have is I have an awesome memory.
Yeah,
and it's something that I've always been super proud of. So I'll look at something and I'm like, I absorb it, and I can come back to that mentally later. So yeah, visually probably helped me out a lot. The auditory part, if it's interesting enough to keep my attention,
then you're good, right?
I'm in. So now in my 40s, when I have trouble sleeping, I'll have an earbud in and I'll have a documentary on that'll help me go back to sleep, because I'm like locked in my head. If it's just quiet, I can't go back to sleep because there's so much stuff. Yeah, it's just, I can't shut it off. So I find something to listen to that's soothing and nice. The problem is that then I get into it and I start listening to it, and I'm awake, until I'm not.
Yeah.
And then I wake up and I'm like, oh man, I got to rewind that because that was actually pretty interesting.
Yeah.
So I'm learning more now in the middle of the night than I probably ever did in school. So,
but you're interested in those subjects.
And
that's the key there. You know what I mean? Like my long-term memory is exceptional. It is my short-term memory. Something I have to remember for the next 7 seconds. If I happen to be paying attention to it and it's important, it's there for life.
Right.
But when I'm not and I'm listening to 6 other things happen at the same time, that can be discarded. You know what I mean? And so like you get this persona that you're like, well, my memory's kind of, not the same as others. Why do I have to focus so hard to remember this thing? Well, that thing was boring to you. You cannot control what you care about, unfortunately. And I think that's a very good assumption, is like, you can't force yourself. Your brain is like, no, this is not interesting to me, or it is. And if it's under the non-interesting category, unfortunately, a lot of our school system, a lot of the basic things you do in work are technically not interesting after a while because they're not new or they're redundant. And so it's that fight to do that is, I think, where the problems come in. You know what I mean? It takes more energy.
It does, yeah. And obviously, human beings are designed to conserve energy. Yes. And that's going to be something that we'll talk about in the future too. However, you touched on something that's awesome, is that if there's a lot of different stuff going on in the room, I find myself hearing everything and trying to absorb absolutely everything all at the same time. And I think that could be a problem where like kids who are like ADHD and they're like, he's not focusing, he's not paying attention. Yeah. Well, they probably are. They probably heard everything and picked out the stuff that was interesting because you're processing everything all at once and you're completely overwhelmed up here. And so again, that could turn out to be quite the superpower. Yeah.
Well, yeah. I mean, let's lay them out that. And because I feel like some people just have the short attention span these days and they think they're ADHD, but that's also, I believe, because of technology is quicker and quicker and quicker. And so we're developing shorter attention spans due to technology. What I've read is that the traits are very heightened pattern recognition. Okay. A restless feeling when things are dull, you're still restless and you're aware. Weird sleeping patterns. So you get the second burst of energy from like 10 to midnight for some reason. You know what I mean? I don't know. And then the other one is you're very good in an emergency like an emergency situation. You stay calm. And then also during like very tragic times, maybe a death in the family or something extremely like that would make other people very emotional. You're able to separate that from yourself, like emotionally separate or let it go. Or if you have friends you haven't seen for a while, you really they're your friends, but if they're not immediately in your environment, you have a tendency to not forget about them, but you don't reach out for them randomly until something triggers you to remember them. And
that's usually when I'm driving in the car and I can't do anything about it anyway.
And then I make all my best phone calls in the car. Yeah. Yep, 100%. I'm calling all my people in the car. And if they don't answer and then they try to call me back when I get to my place, it's over with.
No, that's not going to happen. I kind of hate being on the phone because, I want to have that conversation with somebody that I haven't talked to in quite some time, but I'm already doing something else or listening to something else, or there's a distraction personally that's happening to me at that moment. And I realize that in some cases, okay, to let your friend just talk. I might not be absorbing any of that, but in a lot, you know what, that might not necessarily be true, because my wife always would call me out.
Okay.
So she would be like, have you heard anything that I've said? Because to her, I am a million miles away.
Yeah.
But I can tell her exactly what she said. And I'm like, yeah, I got it. Well, after 10 years or so, she realized that, okay, he got it. And now I'm in trouble, because if I don't do it, she's like, there's no excuses. You got it. I know you got it. You said it. Yeah. So
it was a learned skill that now that her voice coming in is actually important. It's now become an important thing, right? It's like all the noise around there. Like, wait a minute. She's saying something. I got to pay attention to it. It's very interesting that when I'm listening to somebody and I'm actually intent, I'm not making eye contact with them. I'm not staring at them in the eyes trying to make eye, because when I'm doing that and I'm in a conversation, I'm staring in the eyes trying to give good eye contact. I'm thinking about that, not the words coming out of your mouth.
Oh, okay, gosh, that's a sales technique too.
Yeah,
I mean, if you're in sales, yes, and you're supposed to be maintaining eye contact, but I'm looking through you.
Yeah. and then, but when I'm actually like, if you're going to say something very important, I'm looking down at something, blank that isn't distracting me. And I'm intently listening to every word you say, but I kind of have a tendency to look off into a space when I'm listening, intently. And I don't know why that is, but it's maybe to quiet the rest of the noise. And, when
kind of like I'm doing right now, where I'm focusing on this second camera here, so we can make our videos look cool. Yeah. And I'm listening to you.
Yeah, is that thing rocking and rolling?
No, it's sucking, but that's okay.
Is it actually recording?
No.
Okay.
But that's okay.
We're good.
Yeah, I'll edit that together, so for your benefit out there.
We'll be good. I want to present a scenario of where we came from, and I don't know if I should do it into that camera so it's all dramatic or not. So hit play on it, and we'll see if we can.
You can keep talking, and I'll do my best to. Hey, so we'll try.
All right. So imagine out of the 200,000 years that humanity has existed, 195,000 of them we lived in these little small groups of people, and we ran around. Okay, so
hunter-gatherer societies. Yes.
So who is ADHD people? Who are autistic people? Who are even psychopaths? Like, what role did those people play in that society? It's important to understand, because that's the reason why they're still here, or they would have been evolved out. So imagine this scenario: you are, you're walking down you left the tribe and you're walking through the forest, and you're very aware of all of the surroundings around you. Okay. And there's a little noise over there, and you're looking out in the distance, you see some movement that way, and it's a dull moment, right? Yeah. It's a dull moment, but you're aware of everything and small changes, right? That's an attribute. Then at some point out of nowhere, you see either what you're trying to hunt or something attacks you. And in that moment of, that aggressive moment that normal people will have this hyper emotional response and shut down the fight or flight. Yeah. You stay calm, and it allows you to react and handle the situation in the most optimal way, right? But that situation was very violent and scary. And so when you're done with it and you've killed the thing that we're going to eat, right? You know what I mean? And you're taking it back to the tribe. Now you've separated yourself emotionally from that event, and you're not going to have PTSD as much from it. That, I believe, is who we descend from. Okay. And that, and the people that guarded the tribe at night and during its most dangerous time. And I think that understanding that that's who you descended from means that was an important role in that society. And it's fitting those attributes into today's society, right? You know what I mean? Is what it is. And so I don't think there's anything wrong with us. And I want to be very clear that I think you want to be more of who you are and find a way to live a life within our current society built for neurotypical people, but you have a role. You have an important role: the innovator, the creative person, the person that can go into a room and sense the people that their energy's off and they feel alone, they feel left out. You can read rooms well. All of those attributes apply. You can handle stressful situations. I was a day trader at the Chicago Board of Trade, and the reason why I was good is because I could stay calm when I'm losing money. I'm not, collapsing to make an emotional reaction. I was thinking about whether it's the most optimal thing to get out of this trade or in. It's very helpful in certain situations, and I think it's helpful for the society as a whole to be you. And so I think that you should, be proud of who you are and try to build a life around it, and stop trying to be someone that you're not, or feel bad when you do something that neurotypical people do easily.
Sure. And I did read somewhere that when it comes to ADHD, that you find a life that you build around it.
Yeah.
So in your situation where you found that you were successful in a stressful situation, you're building yourself around it. Now that leads to other things that we'll talk about in other days.
Yeah, exactly.
And one of those
there's always
things,
a negative to every positive, and vice versa.
And unfortunately, that leads to things like anxiety. And that's something that I definitely struggle with, especially in an ADHD situation where I've already moved on to that next task, and I haven't completed the task because, like you say, it's a low dopamine.
You've done the hard part of the task now, and now it's the wrapping it up, right?
And I'm simply not interested in that. I have no interest in where it ends up once the idea is almost done. So, which appeals to the work that I do now with people with special needs, because there's always something new coming my way. There's always a new task being thrown at me that I'm like, okay, cool. Let's tackle this right now.
Every day's dynamic.
Yeah, but then did the stuff that we were working on before, did that get taken care of? Probably not. And so that's where you build this life around trying to complete those tasks if they're important to you.
Yeah.
So for me, there's a lot of tasks that aren't important for me enough to finish, and I admit that. And so I surround myself with the other 20%, where it's like, I'm giving you the 80% to do. And why don't you all, as a group that are working with me, complete that last 20%?
Yeah.
And I feel like,
or like we were saying before, we're in a time of AI and automation like never before. And I've found that low dopamine tasks that I need to be repetitive can be, if they can be automated, automate them. You know what I mean? If you know what I mean? Or in some way, take it out of your brain so you don't have to remember it.
Right.
And I think we're in a time where our few weaknesses that we do have compared to a neurotypical person, we can take those off of our brain and put them onto an automated system or an AI or something, and use those tools to minimize the negatives and maximize the positives.
Absolutely. And something that I do want to touch on now, because while you were talking and I was totally zoning out, these are notes that were from another episode that we did. This is just, like the reporter was like, okay, moving to this camera. These are trivial to us because I really wanted this whole particular episode to be as ADHD as possible. And I think we're doing a pretty good job.
Yeah, it's not hard for us to go that way, right?
Wandering around and trying to stay on task. I think the task in general is, let's talk about what we deal with. Well, and you're going to see that immediately right now, that this is a very wandering mental moment. So we had pulled up a statistic about how many people were actually diagnosed with ADHD. And I think the numbers are a little skewed. They might be a little off, because there's probably a lot of people that are experiencing some of the symptoms of finding it difficult to complete a task, starting and not stopping, or not finishing something, finding consistent new hobbies, and then not following through with those hobbies. Because I was never a sports guy like you were, so I'm more on the academic side, where it's like school was relatively easy for me because I was absorbing everything and able to unwrap everything that was absorbed and put it onto a test.
Well, that makes sense.
So, and I know people sometimes have problems taking tests. And so like that became the reason why I was a solid B, C student. And I just found a letter from college that said, way to keep up that solid C effort. And I don't know who wrote it on my report card, but it was somebody involved in my college world. And I'm sure there's a lot of teachers out there, if you remember me, that you probably are like, oh my gosh, I dealt with that guy. So, but going back to how many people were actually...
Well, yeah, to give you the stat, it's about a little under 5%, and it's from the mental health, .gov, basically. It's from the government site, and then the disease prevention site had slightly different, slightly different stats. But typically it's about like 4.5 to 5% of adults have been diagnosed, but they say less than 20% of the adults that have ADHD have been diagnosed. So what that means is that the 5% could very well be 25% of the population.
Right.
And there's just 20% of the population roaming around, not really either willing to admit it or taking the time. When I did it is after I got sober. And I stopped self-medicating myself. It became very apparent I had it, and I went to the head psychologist of UNLV, where I got my master's degree. And she put me through a 9-hour test. I had to break it up into 3 sections because I couldn't do it all.
Yeah.
I had to retake a 300 Scantron test, which is part of it, twice. She goes, "You're not paying attention to this thing, are you?" I'm like, "No, I wasn't."
Yeah.
But it's like very monkey. You're like, you're remembering 50 things, and then you're trying to hear something, and then you do some Scantrons, and then you go back and recall this, and then it's very bouncing around.
Right.
And it wasn't even to sense ADHD. It was to see if my IQ changed from getting sober, if I did any damage. And so she came back and said, your IQ is the same as what you said it was before, but you are one of the most ADHD adults I've ever met in my life. And I'm like, okay, finally, I'll admit it. And so you gotta be aware that you have it, and there's also type 1 and type 2. So it seems to me that is a lot of head inattentiveness. That's a type 1 thing.
Okay.
And then type 2 is the actual physical body, hyperactivity. I happen to have both.
Okay.
And so that's why, we can relate on some things, but then other things that might not be the same.
Right.
And so that's kind of why I think we sync with some of the stuff. And you said it was a lot more head, which is because that's where your ADHD, kind of lied more.
Right. And I think if you're put in a situation where you are forced to succeed, you figure it out.
Like our parents did, because they didn't know it, they didn't know they even had it. My mom solved it her way. My dad solved it his way. And I got one of each from them. So not knowing you have something is actually, there's a good to it, because you don't know, you can't use it as a crutch.
Sure.
And so in this hyper pharmaceutical age where they want to give everything a name and a pill, I generally have the idea of change your diet, move your body, and if those 2 things don't solve the problem, then introduce a medication. That's kind of the path I'm on, because I think we're too quick to take a pill for things in this day and age. And so I don't know, that's kind of the where I'm at today, as of today.
Sure. And you have told me that exercise and being physical is super important to you. Whereas, I enjoy being active. Mm-hmm. I'm not exercising per se. I surround myself with physical activity in my work. Yeah. And I built that into my life.
I sit at a computer all day. So
and I found that jobs that I had where I was sitting at a computer all day, I was not successful. I was constantly being reprimanded for not getting things done. I was bored. I was gaining weight. I was unhappy. Mm-hmm. And so being able to balance that, being physically exhausted and mentally exhausted at the end of the day is kind of a critical thing for me, because otherwise I'm not sleeping, and then the next day is kind of a struggle. And I actually called you the other day because I was having like the worst ADHD day. And I was like, I am so cloudy today. I'm like, I can't bring myself to get anything started or done, because like the idea of starting something that day, knowing that it wasn't going to get finished, was creating like an anxiety. Yeah. And then you were like, tiny steps, or like,
find anything that you're willing to do, not the thing that you can't do. Find something that you're interested in and start doing that. And then you'll get in a role, and then like kind of switch back over after it. Right. That was a solution I did. Because like you said, you cannot you cannot convince your brain that you care about something. You can will it into doing something,
Right.
but it will care about what it cares. You can't control what you care about. And so that's going to be a thing. I happen to care about like understanding the world around me. So I studied like global economics and history and psychology through trading and that stuff. And then developing skills that help me navigate in that world. Those are the two things I'm always interested in, you know, and I'll always deep dive into them. Outside of those, I mean, some of those skills I think are important at the time aren't. Like learning how to whittle wood, because I think one time I'm going to be camping and I want to do it. I haven't used that one yet.
Right.
But like, you know what I mean? It's like, it's weird what your brain cares about. And so knowing that,
which at one point, whittling wood for a half an hour, you're like, oh, this is actually kind of fun. Awesome. I could do this.
I became a pro in like a week. I was like, I made some puma or panther out of it. So I went hard right away, of course. You know, you want to do things like the most aggressive way.
Yep. Well, and I do find myself doing that
knocking down cameras
and not having consistent hobbies. And I have been told, you should get a hobby. Well, my hobby is my work, because the work keeps me interested, and it's always completely different every single day.
You're a lucky man. You're a lucky man. You have a job that you spend every day that you are interested in. And I think that is very important. That's what I'm kind of trying to develop, because I've went the way of money first type, you know what I mean? Sales. And if you do something you're good at, but you're not in love with doing it, it's not going to end well. And then you might need to go home and take a substance or drink something to like get through your day. But if you're truly, you know, you never work a day, right? If you love what you do, you never work a day. That cliche, it's true.
It's very true.
I think it's more important for us too. You know what I mean?
I think so. And I think there's probably people out there, hopefully there's people watching this that are starting, whether or not you knew that those are things that people actually struggle with.
Yeah.
Those are the sorts of situations where we really want you to reach out and bring some topics up that we can dive into again a little bit deeper and do some research, and maybe have an expert in a certain field come and be a guest on a show, because we want some guests here. So if you're an expert, reach out, because we want to talk about what you know about.
I have no ego in the things I'm saying. So like if someone has a different opinion, you know what I mean? And they want to present to something else, something else. I am all about learning the most about it. And I think the only way to do that is to look at something from all sides and not have an ego about, your opinion versus you take a scientific approach to it. Right. And that's the way I think about this. And you just gather information from all corners. So any statements, any questions that you have that either relate to what we're saying, expand on it, say the opposite. But I have found that I've taken the medicated route, and now I am not on it. I drink caffeine and I move my body, and those are working for me right now. And I think a lot of the negative symptoms of ADHD come out when your body isn't exhausted at the end of the day. Right. And because it needs another avenue to get done. It's someone said this to me that is way smarter than me, and said, you are like an Energizer bunny of energy every morning. Okay. And it's way more than the average person. And you either need to use it or take something to kill it at the end of the day to sleep. And you don't want to do the latter of those. You know what I mean? So it is pointing it in the right direction. I have a physical thing, a creative thing, and a learning thing that I do that I just have in the back of my mind. And so when I'm done with work and I'm still restless, I do one of those. And if that's not enough, I do the other. And if I've learned enough about a subject, then I'll just change it. If my creative thing is run its course, I'll change it. So that's my solution, but I would love to hear other solutions, please.
Building off of that, whatever game show it was on TV where they did phone a friend. Yeah. Would you be that friend?
Oh, God, please call me.
the dumpster fire of useless knowledge.
Oh, my God.
So I got a phone
my
call.
Entire family. Yeah.
Yeah. I got a phone call once from my wife was playing a game with some family members for something, and I was the phone call, and I knew the answer immediately, and they all knew that I was the one that had this trivial knowledge that I could share. But that, I think, comes into being interested in something in short bursts of time, because if you are retaining that information, now Am I successful because I have all of this information? I don't think so.
No,
unless there was a job that paid a lot of money being great at trivia, which, hey, let me know.
We're going to tag this when we post this. I read a podcast of the smartest human being that is alive today. Okay.
Yeah.
He has 190 IQ and he is living on a farm in Missouri. Okay. And they had a complete thing about how he understands the nature of physics and all these things way deeper than we ever could. And someone interviewed him and he said his passion was truth, not money. And so he had his moments to make it, but he didn't like the immoral actions of a lot of things he had to do to acquire that money. And so his passion is truth. And I think the other side of ADHD is that we have a strong moral foundation, you know what I mean? Because you can see people that are hurting and read the rooms. And so I think our moral structure is very sound. And so I don't like doing things that are shady in sales. And so a lot of these jobs that you can make a lot of money in don't feel right for you on a daily basis. And so I want to build a life doing something that makes me proud of what I spent my time on. That's why we're here.
That's exactly the same thing that I had. So I worked for a really large company, multi-billion-dollar organization, and they put us through this really intense sales training course that was like a month long. And after that, all of the information that I took in, I started writing down stuff because they let you loose and they go and let you start talking to customers. And everything that they taught me did feel like I was just like a used car salesman. I'm pushing a product on somebody. I'm not listening to what they actually want. And I started writing notes about like innocent sales. I was like, maybe I could write a book someday called Innocent Sales, because I was really trying to focus on, all right, how do I take all of this stuff that I have available for you and get you the stuff that you actually need, even though that's not going to translate into the commission structure that I was in. And I may not have made the money potential. I know I didn't because I was more interested in what my customer needed and not trying to sell them that next $10,000 item.
Well, the thing is, so I read an article about the most wealthy car salesman that has ever existed. He was in America, right? And he was in the 75, when car sales were big.
Sure.
And they asked him why. And he goes, well, when I approach somebody, I don't force them to buy a car. I try to see what can I do to make sure that anytime this human being has to buy a car for the rest of their life, they come to me. Yeah. And so that's a different approach. That is you frame it in that way. And so his probably first 3 years of sales were not that great. But then he sold more cars than anybody else in the world because everybody came back to him because of a level of trust. So the problem is they want immediate success out of you, but that takes slightly immoral actions, or you know what I mean? Right. And the long-term goal, if you need to be in sales, I think if you take a moral way, you may be slower to start, but you will build a roller coaster by doing it, by staying that course and being someone you trust. The two books that come to mind are Dale Carnegie's How to Win Friends and Influence People and The Go-Giver. And both of them, The Go-Giver is a modern version of the same thing. Okay. And the idea is you give over and above in service, shockingly over and above in service. And you do that without expecting anything in return. And you just do it over and over again. And you end up building a world around you of people that almost feel indebted to you to succeed. They want you to do well because they were shocked at how much time and that you've given them. Right. And so you start growing on this foundation of this people that you build versus someone that cuts corners and they'll grow faster than you, but it's built on stilts. And as soon as they mess up, they fall all the way to the bottom. Yeah. As soon as you mess up, and something happens outside your control and you mess up, they support you and they go, no, I understand, whatever. And so it's a long-term versus a short-term outlook. And I think that if we stay inside our moral framework and act like that, we'll feel better about ourselves. You know what I mean? And it'll work out in the long run.
And this is completely unrehearsed and we're just going off the cuff. And so you're bringing back stuff. So for maybe 15 years, I ran a paint contracting company. Okay. And that's exactly what I would do. And that's exactly how my customers treated me because I was like over and above and beyond. kind of overly explaining things, letting people know when I'm having a challenge and if, the timeline's not working out. And I got more word of mouth business than I could believe or could take. And, it ultimately led me to a different career, but
which is fine.
A career that is more worthwhile, and a career like founding an organization called Ability, which focuses on the abilities that people have and utilizing all of the strengths that are available out there in any person, anywhere, despite what you're considered. And that's where I really hope that this whole organization can help people and talk about all the different challenges that people have.
If I can spend my days making people feel better about themselves and be the best version of themselves, I'm going to sleep well at night. And so it's partially selfish. You know what I mean? Like I want to feel good about my day.
Right.
But, and I think I found that the only way I can do that is to put as much good out in the world as I can and use as much of these little things we've learned that we've been able to piece together and bridge and help as many people as possible. A very intelligent person said to me, the first thing you have to do is is to master one skill, right? But after that, if you're smart, you just learn a bunch of other random skills, and maybe you're 80 or 90% as good as them as that one that you mastered. But if you do that, the way that you do these things will help you do this one better.
Right.
You know what I mean? So people that are in a tunnel that like maybe they're a doctor and you've only around doctors and you only around surgeons and they think only this way. If you go learn music and other, you know what I mean? You'll think about your main job in new ways. And so it's first being a master of one. And that saying anyways, a jack of all trades,
a master of none.
What is it? So
a jack of all trades and a master of none.
Is a jack of all trades and a master of none, but the rest of the saying is, but oftentimes better than a master of one. That's actually the full saying.
Okay.
They cut it in half.
Okay.
I know. People only say the front half of it.
Yeah. Okay.
So it's like
that's awesome.
Isn't that cool?
Yeah.
There's some random stat from like 10 years ago that you just brought it. The file opened in my head.
Yeah.
I don't even remember reading that, but
that leads me to have you heard?
That's awesome. So ADHD, man. Oh God.
I see, said the blind man.
Yeah, I remember that.
Well, there's a second half to that too.
What is it?
As he picked up his hammer and saw. I see, said the blind man, as he picked up his hammer and saw.
Oh, dude, I love that.
So the first part actually could be considered a little offensive at this point, but then when you see like there's a riddle behind it because it has multiple meanings, I think that's fun. That had nothing to do with anything else, but that's what you triggered when you were saying that.
Isn't it weird? Like you won't. And if you ask me to say, "Hey, Dino, tell me a random fact," I got nothing. But if you give me a subject, you know what I mean? And then this file opens from way back in the day and I pull something out. I need like a topic that opens. It's almost like a Google search. You can't search something interesting, then nothing comes up.
Right.
But then search this topic and all of a sudden.
And I'm down the rabbit hole.
Yeah, exactly. Well, we had to be. I mean, what was the original topic even?
Yeah, I don't even know. So my son is doing a report on Henry Ford, and he's 8 years old. So it's going to be this general overview of Henry Ford. And he hasn't shared this with me yet, so I don't know what this is going to be. But as he was saying stuff, I was like, oh, did you know that he was involved with this person? And did you realize that like Kingsford charcoal came to be because Henry Ford was buying lumber from Kingsford and his lumber mills, and they had all of this byproduct. And Henry Ford and Kingsford came together and said, oh, let's make these charcoal briquettes. And it's still a thing.
Really?
So where that came in, I was just like, my son was kind of, whether he was asking me for guidance or not about his report, I was like inundating him with all this trivial information that was like, oh, this might be interesting to talk about. That he's not going to talk about because he's he's 8 years old. And his teacher just wants him to do his report and not be on a crazy tangent.
Yeah.
But,
well, I mean, my favorite Henry Ford thing is that during the time of the automobile boom, he paid his workers 3 times more. The factory was every 3 times more than any other automobile dealer. And what happened is he grew to 200,000 workers, and those workers could afford to buy a Ford vehicle.
Oh, sure.
So, you know what I mean? So like this whole, and we're in this age of hyper focus on squeezing down the workers' pay, and every company's doing it, and they've been doing it for 70 years. The problem is your worker is a customer at 200 other places, and your customer is a worker somewhere else. So when the whole country kind of does that, you bring down the disposable income that you need to support your business.
Yeah.
And he knew that. And so he paid more and created a bunch of loyal people that never left the job and could afford to buy one of the vehicles, and became customers. And it's my favorite thing about him.
Do you know where ADHD doesn't work at all? An assembly line. I could never, ever
doing the same thing
over and over.
If you had like a podcast in one ear and something, listen to music, learning a new skill in one ear, maybe. But
when I was in college, one time I did Labor Ready, a company where you could just walk in and say, give me whatever job's available today. And I ended up working for like 8 hours at a factory where they were putting springs in something for like a doorknob.
Okay.
And I left at lunch. I was like, this is driving me crazy. And so I have a lot of respect for people who can do that over and over and over again.
There's nothing bad about that job. No, it's necessary.
It's absolutely necessary, but that's not where our brains can be. And when you bring back all of this history about, there is a specific type of person that got us through some of the hardest times in our evolution. I think that ADHD person was probably integral part of
I mean, it's not even
getting stuff 80% done.
It's not even human beings. So like in a bee population, you think bees are like one of the most orderly organism that exists, right? They listen to the queen, that's it. 20% of the bees do not listen to anything the queen says when she does their dance, and they go roam around randomly. And when they find new pollen, they tell the queen does the dance, and the rest of the 80% go mine that pollen. So that ADHD 20% finds 90% of the new pollen that the bee population does a year. Right. If they had all one brain structure, they would just be like, who would find the new pollen? Right. And then the other guy's got to go mine it, which is just as important. Right. But you need that randomness, that searcher, the hunter, the person that's out there willing to roam. And so how does that apply to today? That is really the question you got to ask. How do my skill sets apply to today? Obviously, I think it's my opinion in that same society that the autistic community, which I don't know if that's okay to say these days, but like I think they drove a lot of the technological change in those early times. Sure. And obviously psychopaths, which are most of our CEOs these days, they, obviously it was important to be able to be violent and protect the society, and then be okay with that and sleep well at night. So those three
Genghis Khan.
They played a role. So I think that's why they all exist, and they had important roles. And that's very general. That's very general the way I'm saying it, but I'm trying to generalize, a couple 100,000 years of humanity and just understand that we are only 5,000 years into planting crops and living in populations of larger than 35. Right. And that took a different mindset, and not enough time has passed. Maybe 10,000 years from now, we'll all be born like enlightened like Buddha, and some socialist network will work. But capitalism works because it aligns the selfish actions of the individual in the family with the greater good of the whole. And that is because we are still hunter-gatherers. And so, And so that's kind of the theory behind it, is that we're still those people. Not enough time has passed that we could be anything else. So understand that, and try to live a life aligned with those attributes you have. You have abilities. I love that name. Great name, man.
Yeah, and we're going to start making abilities, T-shirts with logos that we're going to use to fund some of the great things that we do. So once we get that up and running, we'll have links available so that you can buy our abilities, which, we're not showing that right now. It's not ready because that's an idea that I came up with 10 seconds ago. But there are reasons why this organization and this whole idea is going to work, and it comes with funding, and it comes with sponsorships, and it comes with doing fundraising activities, whether it's like we're building or selling something. And I think that's really going to appeal to the ADHD nature of personally myself and some of the people that work with me and some of the other people that I think are going to find their way to the ability network and the world that we're building around people who might be considered a little bit different, but you have a superpower, you have an ability, and we'd like to work together with you to create something amazing. So
let's get together and do cool stuff, man. You know what I mean?
That's all it is.
I mean, that's what it is. The more we can align and talk about it, the better I think it's going to be. So, yeah.
All right. Anything else you want to touch on that's completely unrelated?
You can't ask me that general question. I got nothing right now. So.
Yeah, no, I couldn't think of anything either. So, all right. So
send us a topic. Believe me, we'll talk about it. I'm sure one of us researched it.
You need more coffee.
Yeah.
So any communication that you can send our way is going to be really important. We would love to hear from you, and it's our responsibility. It's like you sent it to me.
I got you.
It's our responsibility to ask you to please subscribe to this. Please share and give us the thumbs up. That we don't know why that works and why that's important, but I do know that the more people subscribe and are sharing this idea, the better ideas and the better content that we're going to be able to come up with. So don't be afraid to reach out.
Our goal is to deep dive on some of the individual things we touched on. You know what I mean? More. Obviously, this was a general overview, and we are not cutting any of those bloopers either. So you're getting all of us. 100%.
Yeah, I don't think I even need to edit this one.
I'm not retaping anything.
Splice in this hidden camera that I tried to.
I already forgot what I said anyway, so I can't do it again.
That's why I'm looking at these notes from last time, and I'm like, oh, did we do that last time? So anyway. Thank you so much for being a part of our insane rant, and we hope to hear from you and look forward to the next topic that we decide to do.
Appreciate your time.